Welcome to Behind the Bower, where we bring you inspiring conversations, a fresh look at arts in our community, and spotlights on the incredible artists, performers, collaborative partners, and organizations that make our creative world thrive. Through this podcast, we aim to celebrate the universal expression of human experience through arts, culture, and community. I'm your host today, Lauren Hood, Program Coordinator for Bower Center for the Arts. In this episode, we're diving into the world of art quilting with Ellen Lindner, known to many as the Adventure Quilter. Ellen is a nationally recognized fiber artist and educator who brings bold colors, abstract design, and vibrant energy into every piece she creates. She'll be joining us at the Bower Center in August to teach her floral improv workshop, an exciting one-day class that empowers students to create their own unique floral compositions without patterns or templates. Today, we'll explore Ellen's creative journey, her love for improvisational design, and the rewarding experience of guiding others to discover freedom in fabric. Good morning, Ellen.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, I'm pleased. I'm happy to be.
Yeah. So we're just going to dive right into these questions. We're going to start with a little bit of an intro. So you have had a very interesting journey from flight instruction to fiber art. What inspired you to transition into that quilting full-time, both as like a part-time quilting instructor and then a part-time artist?
Well, I was a flight instructor, like you said, for over 20-some years.
Wow.
And when I became a mom in 1993, I wanted to work part-time, but they didn't have a way for me to do that in the air, but they did have a way for me to do that on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And that was teaching at the local college where I worked, and teaching pilots who were becoming flight instructors themselves.
Wow.
So, I did that. And meanwhile, I took up traditional quilting.
Mm-hmm.
And began to, after about 10 years, moved into more art quilting. And eventually, as I was teaching what we call a ground school, I saw that I was getting rusty in my own knowledge and things. So now we're up to early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I either needed to get refresher training myself, or maybe decide that aviation had run its course and maybe I would do something else. So by now I was teaching quilting part-time, and I was ground school part-time. I decided, well, if I'm going to be working part-time, I think I would like it to be in the field of quilting, and just say this aviation thing has run its course. So I started teaching quilting around 2000 or so, and eventually left the flying behind. It had its ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
So glad to leave that. It was great, but I was ready to move on, and so then I started teaching the quilting, teaching at a lower altitude.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. Talk a little bit about how your upbringing or your early experiences influenced your creative path, maybe into quilting or just artistry in general.
My mom was and still is an artist, still at the age of 88.
Wow.
And she would tell my sister and I sort of artsy things without using artistic terminology. So we were learning some things from her.
Yeah.
So I remember her explaining how you could put one big item on a mantle, and then on the other end you could put two small items, and that it would go well together.
Mm-hmm.
So of course she was teaching us about artistic balance without using that terminology.
Mm-hmm.
And there were other examples where she'd point out to us, this or that or whatever. And so I found that when I took up art in my 40s, and I self-taught, I would read books and things like that, it all came easily to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I credit my mom with that.
Yeah.
And I think that early influence in those examples made it easier. I have to tell you that in my childhood definition of an artist, I thought it meant somebody who could paint.
Yeah.
So as a teenager, I tried painting one time and it was terrible. So I said to myself, okay, well, I didn't get the artistic gene,
Oh,
and the, okay, end of story. But then in my 40s, I did get interested in art, and like I said, read the books and learned it myself.
no. Mhm.
So it turns out, oh, well, I am an artist after all. I'm just not a painter.
Right,
I paint with
exactly.
fabrics.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Ellen, you describe yourself as the adventure quilter. What does that title mean to you, and how has it shaped your approach to fiber arts?
Well, there's a funny story that goes with that. When my husband and I got married, there were all the wedding gifts, and a whole bunch of them had to do with cooking.
Mm.
So there was a wok and a food processor and casserole dishes and recipe books. And I was a new bride. I didn't know any better, so I actually used all that stuff. And so I started experimenting, and I would use a new gadget or a new technique
Mhm.
or a new recipe. And I was a little too creative. I did things like substituting Velveeta for Parmesan cheese
Wow.
and making a big mess. That one wasn't so good. Making making a big mess with the food processor and
Oh
stuff like that.
gosh,
It was
yeah.
all edible.
Mhm. Yeah,
It was all edible,
right.
but there were a few things that my husband and I decided we didn't necessarily need to save the leftovers on that particular
Yeah.
one. But it wasn't long before he came up with a name for these meals, and he called them adventure meals. And
Oh,
so, of
cool.
course, an adventure meal was one in which I was experimenting.
Mhm.
And many years later, I realized that, at the time, my goal was to get dinner on the table. It was that end product.
Mhm.
But I realized in hindsight that the process of all that experimenting was was useful, was valuable because I gained a lot of cooking skills.
Right.
And so even when we didn't save the leftovers, it I the process had been valuable to me. And so when I realized that, I said, I like that philosophy, and I'm going to remember that as I'm making art quilts.
Yeah.
And if something doesn't come out right, I'll just remind myself that the process was valuable. I didn't waste my time. I didn't waste my fabric because
Mhm.
I learned things from the process. So that made me rather fearless
Yeah.
where art quilting is concerned because I have this attitude of experimenting and
Mhm.
risk taking and not being concerned if it doesn't come out perfectly. So that's why I call my quilts adventure quilts, and I'm the adventure quilter because of just simply that experimentation aspect. That's where that comes from.
Mm. That's awesome. There's definitely so much freedom in that mindset when you're pursuing any form of artistry, but especially quilting.
Yes,
It reminds me of like the
I
whole.
think you.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say I think it's necessary for creativity that you are
Mhm.
a little bit fearless. At least that's true for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It reminds me of like the happy little accidents concept for sure.
Hmm.
Just
Hmm.
yeah,
Sure,
that's
sure.
awesome. So let's take a look at your artistic process and vision. Your work, as you talked about, is often abstract and it's vibrant and it's layered. How would you describe your artistic voice and how has it evolved over time?
Well, I'm a sucker for vibrant colors and strong contrast. And that's been true pretty much from the get go of my quilt making, even when I was doing traditional quilting. I think a lot of that comes from living in Florida,
Mm,
where we have the really strong contrast. Um, we have these really interesting, vibrant foliage,
hmm
bright flowers with spiky shapes and things like that. And then you have the sun.
Mm.
which gives you very vibrant colors, but it also gives you dark shadows and then some areas that are completely whitewashed and look white. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that strong contrast that I see every day has probably influenced my preference for that. So early on in the art quilting, I did make a lot of quilts that were Florida foliage.
Mm-hmm.
And that just fed my preferences, really, really well
Mm-hmm.
because of the colors and so forth that I just described. But eventually I got to where I wanted more energy in the pieces rather than it just being, a static plant. I wanted more energy and was drawn to um, abstract quilts that I had seen. So I decided I would try my hand at abstract. It is quite challenging for me, I think, but that's one of the reasons I like it. I like a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And so nowadays I'm printing my own fabric with dyes,
Mm.
thickened dyes, and then I'm making some large scale kinds of prints on
Yeah.
my fabric. And so they give me a new dynamic and energy. Maybe I cut into them a little bit and rearrange things. And so I'm still doing that whole vibrant colors, strong contrast, but now with the energy of the abstract lines
Yeah.
that I'm using. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that you started with the inspiration of what was just in your backyard and your window in your home state. That's
Mhm.
awesome. That's I've talked
Sure.
to a couple of different fiber artists in different fields, whether it's needle felting, or wet felting. You're actually the first quilter that I've talked to, so congratulations. um,
Thanks.
but a lot of them also take inspiration from nature, and it's just that raw fabric and using nature and the things outside. It just is a connection there. I think with the fiber arts, there's some connection with the fiber arts and the great outdoors, and I love that.
Yeah, and I think so. Although I have to say that lots of times my inspiration is simply the fabric itself
Mm.
after I've created these strong patterns
Yeah.
that I just get really excited by, oh, look how these look together,
Yeah.
and this collection of fabric. Sometimes I don't put things away very quickly, and so there'll be a pile of fabrics that I wasn't expecting to use together, but they look kind of interesting piles on my on my table. They're not even folded or anything, and
They're
then maybe the fabric itself becomes an inspiration as well.
Wow. That's awesome. So, how do you decide when like a piece is finished? Because obviously you've got a lot of creativity and a lot of that adventure quilter in you. Just constantly going with the ebb and flow. When you're working in a medium that allows for so much layering and flexibility, how do you know? Okay, this is the finished product.
Yeah, um, I knew you were going to ask me that question, and I've been thinking about it. And I'm afraid my answer is very trite because my answer is, when I'm happy with it, when I'm
Yeah.
content with it, then it's done. I spend a lot of time studying it, just
Hmm.
standing in front of the design wall and looking at what I've got and making a change and maybe taking a photograph and back and forth, up to the design wall and away to the camera and back and forth and playing with fabrics. And eventually I just look at it and I don't think it needs anything else. And it's singing to me and probably it's pretty energetic. And then I say, okay, I'm happy with it. And
Yeah.
then it's done.
No, I think that's great. I think that's as artists, that's something that's so hard to do is to be like content with what you have, whether it's in the finishing
Yes,
stages or anything, and then you want to add this, you want to take away this or whatever. So I think just having
right,
that contentment and that happiness of being like, no, like this is the finished product and this is it and this is in its perfect state. You know what I mean?
right, right.
Yeah.
And it may not be in its perfect state,
Right.
but it's a state that I'm content with and I'm
Right.
ready to call it finished. And it's good enough to show the world, okay. Or sometimes it's not good enough to show the world, and then and that's okay too. Then,
Yeah.
but I'm through playing with it, and it doesn't go on my website, and it becomes fodder for something down the road.
Yeah,
That's fine
absolutely.
too.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Um, so are there any particular tools or techniques that you find essential to your process or that you've developed uniquely to suit your style?
Um, I would say my design wall, and if you don't mind, I'll describe my process a little bit.
Yeah.
So I have a design wall which is 4 feet by 5 feet.
Mhm.
And it's a big piece of housing insulation covered with flannel. And so it works for me like a fabric bulletin board. So I can pin fabrics up on it and try them out together. So, first of all, of course, I've printed my own fabric. I use thickened um, print, thickened dye. Um, Most people are probably familiar with the liquid state of dye. Like maybe you have a blouse that says it was garment dyed. Well, they
Mm.
dipped that whole entire blouse into something liquid dye solution, and it came out the color that you see.
Yeah.
And then you get a nice even color and you stir it and blah, blah. Well, I don't do that. Instead, I make what's called a print paste
Mm.
that is still clear at that point, and it's about the thickness of honey, maybe a little more than that. And so because I've thickened it, once I add the color to it, I can stamp with it, draw with it, use a stencil, scrape it onto the fabric. I can do all sorts of different manipulations once I've thickened that dye.
Mm.
So I've printed my fabrics. I do that in my design studio. And then once I get all these fabrics together, I take it to the design wall. So the first thing I do is I'll just pin up a bunch of fabrics that I think might go together.
Mhm.
And then I sort of edit out the ones that are, they're kind of shouting too much or they're taking over or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And edit out my selection. And then I'm ready to start composing on the design wall. And I have no idea where I'm going because it all evolves as I'm doing it, which is really, really engaging. I love that
Mhm.
process. And it is, as I said, quite challenging for me.
Yeah.
So usually I'll start with the fabric that maybe the highest contrast, the one that's got a lot of light and dark contrast in it. I know that's going to be an attention getter type of fabric, and maybe I'll place it where I want it to go, and then I'll begin to audition. I start out by just folding the fabrics rather than cutting into them necessarily.
Mhm.
Folding fabrics and rearranging, and then eventually I'll piece together a few units, and so then I can move the entire unit around and add fabric, subtract. Then I get brave enough to start cutting and sewing things together, piecing things together.
Mhm.
And I pay a lot of attention to the composition, where light and dark are falling, and where your eye is drawn, and just keep moving things around until I'm happy enough to start doing some stitching. And it's still probably going to evolve from that point.
Right.
So back to your original question, what tools do I use that I would really need? Well, the first one would probably be my design wall. Without that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to audition the composition, the way that I have described.
Yeah.
I also have some pieces that are going in the show in August
Mhm.
that are each one of them is a single leaf, large, about 24 inches long, and they're 3D.
Wow.
They have wire in them so that that crease of the where the vein is, and
Yeah.
how the leaf kind of rolls to one side and rolls to the other side.
Yeah.
With the wire in there, I can do that.
Oh, that's
So
awesome.
these will be in the show, and they're some of my favorites actually. They have a really nice appeal, I think,
Mhm.
because back to being inspired by nature, not just the color. Um, when I was first inspired to make these, it wasn't just the color that I saw in a leaf. it was that kind of arc, an arch of the spine of the leaf and the way it curved. So I did have to do quite a bit of engineering to
Yeah.
figure out how to make these. All right, now I'm making quilts with wire in the middle, and what kind of wire do I have to add, and how do I finish the edges? I did have to do quite a bit of engineering and problem solving when I did those. So those will be in the show, and viewers will be able to see what I'm talking about.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to
Yeah.
see those. That's so
Thanks.
awesome. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
could you share a project that challenged you creatively or taught you something new about your process?
Yeah. Um, the one that I finished recently really gave me a time. And I think it came down to the cuts I was willing to make. Historically, I've been a little bit protective of these motifs that I've printed. Let's say it was large circles on a fabric, and I wouldn't want to cut into those circles too much. Cut into them, but I show and then I wanted to have some whole circles elsewhere so the audience could view them as circles and so forth. And because I was so protective of them, it kind of limited my options.
Mhm.
So on this more recent quilt, I got brave enough to cut through those motifs, and that worked out really well.
Yeah.
So once I got up the courage to do more of that,
Mm.
um, the shape the shape was more dynamic
Mhm.
after I cut into it, and you could still read what the shape had been, what it was supposed to be, and so that was a very valuable valuable insight to me. So I'll definitely be doing more of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's awesome. Yes. We are coming up on our last few questions. I've got about two more questions for you, and then we will finish out our podcast today. Um, First, what advice would you give to an emerging artist, especially those considering non-traditional paths within the quilting world?
Um, well, I think any artist, the first bit of advice is just to make a lot of art.
Yeah.
That as you're doing that, that's where you begin to develop your preferences that will help you create or identify, what the artist calls her voice, her
Mhm.
style.
Mhm.
And so I think definitely make a lot of art.
Yeah.
Then to study art, in my case, my first inspirations into art were other art quilts.
Mm.
I've expanded upon that some now, but initially that was a lot of my inspiration, and I would study them. And if there was a quilt that I liked, I would try to analyze it and see what is it that I like about it. I didn't have any art training and to read the books, so I would notice, oh, I like the way that dark and that light are together right there, and my
Mhm.
eye is drawn to that, and that's very dramatic. And so I was teaching myself, oh, that's a good way to draw attention. So
Mhm.
by studying the art, whatever your preferred medium is, and then there's taste. I'm big on that artistic chances,
Mhm.
and the title of my exhibit is "Embracing the Unexpected," and that's why I wanted that title because that's what I do in the moment as I'm designing on the design wall, and week to week and month to month that I'm just going with the flow and seeing what needs to happen, and if I can't decide between A and B, I'll ask myself which which one is the most outlandish. Let
Mhm.
me try that first, and if I don't like that, I can change it. Nothing's set in stone. Let
Yeah.
me try that oddball thing first, and so that I think is important. Take those chances.
Um,
Embrace the unexpected.
yes. That is such a great name for it, and I cannot wait for you to come and join us in August. We'll talk about that in a second. Um, so final question, what projects are you currently working on and what excites you the most about where your work is headed next?
Well, right now I'm putting a lot of effort into getting ready for the show,
Yes.
which which involves reworking some of my hanging mechanisms. So I've got some technical tasks that are keeping me busy.
Mhm.
So I suspect by the time August gets here, I'm going to be ready for a breather. but but also my future projects are going to be basically more of the same.
Mhm.
I do get inspired by the colors as I'm printing, and then I get inspired by those fabrics in front of me, and continue to take chances and experiment, go with lots of color, lots of contrast, some energy, and that's where I see myself going with my quilt.
Yeah. Yes, that is so
Definitely be
exciting. Yeah.
embracing the unexpected once again. Throw
Right.
that in
Absolutely, that's the
there.
theme. Ellen, thank you again for sharing your time and insight with us today. Your thoughtful approach to improvisation, your passion for teaching, and your willingness to embrace unpredictability are truly inspiring. And for our listeners, if you'd like to experience Ellen's work in person, don't miss her solo exhibition, Embracing the Unexpected with Fabric, Dye, and Stitch, opening on Tuesday, August 19th, with her artist reception that Friday, August 22nd at 5 p.m. Then come back the next day, Saturday, August 23rd, for her floral improv workshop hosted at Bauer Center for the Arts. You can find all the details and register at bowercenter.org. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time on Behind the Bower.